Right before we jump into this video, if you'd like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on froknowsphoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Jared Polin, froknowsphoto.com, and this is a review of the Nikon 35mm f1.2 S lens. Now this lens has been on Nikon's roadmap secretly in the background in one of those silhouettes for a long time, and it is finally here. And it is the first native 1.2 from Nikon, Canon, or Sony. Now I say native for full frame because Sigma has had this bad boy out for a long time. This is the Sigma E-mount 1.2. They also make it for L-mount, or the L-mount Alliance as well, and it's now showing as discontinued online, so I don't think they're making it, but I absolutely loved this lens. When I jumped from Nikon to Sony, this was the go-to lens for me. What an amazing environmental portrait lens that could do so many amazing things. Was it perfect? No, but it was a 1.2 full frame that nobody else offered. So let me put this back down below because this is a review of the Nikon. And what did I shoot? Well, I went out to a friend's restaurant, which is one of the best new restaurants in Philly called Bastia. Tyler allowed me to come in, get some portraits of him, also get him working, get him R&Ding some new food. Everything looked fantastic, and it was a real-world situation where I could get actual real-world environmental portraits. That's why I went out there and recorded my EVF so you can see everything in action, from the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And I will say, there wasn't a lot of bad and indifferent. So far, this thing is pretty damn amazing. So it looks like Nikon has beat Canon and Sony to the 1.2 punch, and in fact, Nikon basically has the trinity of lenses that nobody else has: 35-1.2, 50-1.2, and an 85-1.2. They all do different things, and I'll talk more about that at the end when I get to who it's for, but I love the 35-1.2 just for the fact that it's an amazing environmental portrait lens. So now let's get to the outside of the lens. This is, it's a chody, chunky, big lens, very similar to that of the 50-1.2 that Nikon offers. Does it feel heavy in the hands? The answer is no, because I'm used to using a 28-70 f2 from Canon, and that weighs like 3.15 pounds, where this thing weighs in at 2.34 pounds, or 1,060 grams. So it's heavy, but it's not that heavy. Now, in comparison to Nikon's 35-1.4, that's like a feather, and this is much heavier, but it doesn't feel imbalanced or unbalanced in the hands. It is a very nice looking and feeling lens. Now, what it's missing is the gold ring, because for whatever reason, Nikon did away with the gold ring, and this is one of the best lenses they've ever made. It should have a gold ring. Don't know why it doesn't. There's only one switch on this lens. You have your auto to manual. You do not have any VR switches. Why? Because Nikon doesn't really put VR switches on their lenses anymore. They make you control that inside of the body, but also this lens does not have any VR, which is normal for 1.2 lenses. It would end up adding a lot of weight to put the mechanics in here and a lot of extra price, and this, you'll see, is already an expensive lens. You have your manual focus ring right here, which covers a large portion of the lens. I'm not sure that you're ever going to be manually focusing this, especially at 1.2. We kind of need to rely on autofocus these days at 1.2, but it covers most of the lens, doesn't get in the way. Your hand rests right on it. It's in a very good place. You have your control ring, which is if you want to set that yourself. I personally have it turned off. I still don't set that to anything. Now, for those of you who are like, well, does this have a aperture ring? The answer is no. There is no aperture ring that is mechanical on this lens, which is something that Canon and Sony have been doing with their 1.4s and 1.8s and most of their lenses. They're adding that to it. I don't think it needs it, but you could always set this command ring, this custom ring, to do aperture if that's something you want to do. I personally like to shoot at 1.2 all the time if I have a 1.2 lens, so I don't need that, especially when I can just change it right inside of the camera. You have your Nikkor logo, the S logo, letting you know it's an S-line lens, and you have two custom function buttons right here that you could custom set. Comes with your lens hood, typical flower lens hood, put it on, use it. You have your 82mm filter thread, so this is your 82mm lens cap. Inside of here, you have 11 aperture blades. Now, I should say that a lot of the specs of this lens are very similar to that of the Sigma. Now, where this might differ is that you have 2 STM motors in here for autofocus, and the autofocus was lightning blazing quick. When I was shooting, I never looked in there and was like, oh, I'm waiting for autofocus. Like, it's slow? Not at all. Imperceivable that it was autofocusing. That's how fast it was on the Nikon Z9. Now, in terms of length, you can see right here, it looks to be, yeah, it's like 5.9 inches. Yeah, 5.9 inches, just shy of 6 inches. It's not that big. I mean, it's a big lens for being a 35, especially when you break out the Nikon 35 1.4, and you can see the difference in size here. Difference in size, difference in weight. And will there be a difference between 1.2, 1.4, and 1.8? We will see that in just a second as we jump into these images. So starting off the bat, I started with some portraits of Tyler in the restaurant while it was empty. There's not a ton of daylight, and this is what I ended up with. I love 35mm for environmental portraits. The reason is you can still separate the subject from the background, but you do get to see the environment even when you get a little closer to the subject. Whereas with an 85mm, it's more isolating your subject, and when it's 1.2, it's obliterating the background as you get closer, and a 135 1.8, you kind of just lose out on the entire environment, and it just ends up being a basic portrait. But here, I loved how the light was coming in and hitting Tyler right on the side of the face. Is it the most perfect lighting in the world? The answer to that is no. You notice that it almost looks like he has a black eye in the shadow area. That's just because it's in the shadow and there's not a lot of light hitting it. It just tends to look like that. But it is sharp, it is colorful. The autofocus was pretty accurate, and you will see throughout the video with the electronic viewfinder footage that we captured that you might see the green box bouncing around a little bit. Sometimes it would find the top of the head, other times it wouldn't go where the eye was, but it seemed to hit the majority of the time, and so maybe that it's just lagging behind and there needs to be a firmware update to make that go a little quicker. But even though it wasn't exactly where it needed to be, it still was doing what it needed to do at 1.2. You have to be right on at 1.2, and this is nice and sharp at 1.2. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you FROPAC 4 in action on this awesome photo that Troy took. So let's start here with Blue's Clues from FROPAC 4, followed by Brooklyn. We've got C41 with no grain. We've got Copper Tone with extra bronzer, DeLorean, Kaleidoscope, Saltwater Taffy with grain or no grain, whichever way that you like it. We've got Thick, and we've got Wet, Hot American Summer. So look, if you want to speed up your raw workflow, give yourself a great starting point, or you're just tired of other people's presets sucking, as you can see, ours do not suck. That's why we created 14 all-new custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at froknosphoto.com/FROPAC4. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up today, they are currently on sale. Or you could get the Grand Slam bundle, which includes FROPAC 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can save even more. Now, let's get back to the video. Next, we transition into the kitchen where Tyler was getting ready to cut up some raw fish. I like raw fish. They do some amazing crudo dishes there. And this is a tough situation to shoot in because of the mixed lighting. You've got these flickering lights up above. I had to put on the anti-flicker just to compensate for the way that the lights were flickering in there. But I cannot stress how much I love this lens for environmental portraits. Back in the day, I had the 35 1.4 Nikon, and I took that to Paris and did a whole photo shoot around Paris and absolutely loved it. But I feel that the DSLRs were much harder to get your focus tack sharp because they did a lot of back focusing, and you don't have that with the mirrorless cameras. So as we zoom in on Tyler's face right here, it looks like his eye, his nose, the plane, it looks like everything's in focus. And I'm also a little further back, so I'm not filling the frame completely, and you can see how the background is still there, but it does dissipate because we are shooting at 1.2. But the colors, the tones, I'm really happy with how the edits turned out. Now, as we step closer, you do have the ability to close focus down to 11.8 inches, which is like almost a whole ruler. It kind of felt like I was able to get a little closer to that than that, but I wasn't super close to the bowl of the raw fish. But I love that I'm focused in on the fish in the bowl, and you can see Tyler cutting it in the background. So that is nice. That's his nice separation. Remember, wides, mediums, tights, details. Try to tell the story, and you can do so much of that with a 35 1.2, or just 35mm for that matter in general. So not only did I want to get some action and candid shots in the kitchen, but I also want to get some portraits, some stand-ups, some verticals that look fantastic. So let's zoom in on this. You'll see a lot of black and white images because that just felt right to me in the kitchen. The colors are great, but when you have mixed lighting, and especially when the hot lamps, the heat lamps he turned on created an even hotter light, it was much easier and better, in my opinion, to go black and white. But damn, that is sharp, tack sharp, beautiful fall off. I'm happy with these results, really happy with how the images are turning out so far. Jumping on, I went to the other side of the kitchen so I could use some of the inanimate objects to draw us into Tyler, but also to test out the IAF. Will it get distracted by the stuff in the foreground? And in this case, you can see he's nice and sharp. He is beautiful. It went right to his eye and it focused, and that's what we wanted it to do. Now I want to show you the difference between 1.2, 1.4, and 1.8. It was all done with this lens because I didn't want to go switching lenses. I wanted to keep everything as same as possible, and all I changed was the aperture and got my exposure where it needed to be. Now, can you tell on the screen right now which is 1.2, which is 1.4, and which is 1.8? The answer to that question is no. There's no way in hell you're able to tell the difference. And even when you know that this is 1.2, this is 1.4, and this is 1.8, it's imperceivable. I mean, there might be subtle things that you can find in the top, the bokeh. You might be like, this might be better, this might not be. To the everyday person, and even to the professional like me, you're not seeing much of a difference there. But that's not a reason to say that a 1.8 is better because it's cheaper, it's less expensive. There's so many different things that happen inside of a 1.2 lens, from the coatings to the elements that are used to the flaring that you don't get, that makes this a superior lens at the end of the day. But superior doesn't always mean it's the right thing for you. I'm sure if you pixel peeped and you looked, you might see a difference in fall off, but a lot depends on how close you get to your subject, the subject to the distance to the background. There's so many different parameters that go into differentiating the backgrounds. Now, you're going to see a slight difference in certain situations. If we were to photograph bokeh balls or Christmas lights in the background, you might start to see a difference there. Now, keep in mind, that's just the difference with the background. There is a difference when it comes to gathering light. So from 1.2 to 1.8 is one stop. From 1.2 to 1.4 is a third of a stop of light. So your light gathering ability is slightly different by one stop when you go from 1.8 to 1.2. Keep that in mind when you're making your decision. So like I've said time and time again, I love the ability of having this lens for environmental portraits, whether it's being able to get most of the kitchen in there with multiple people working, or just getting as close as possible to a subject and giving us some pretty good results. But the big question is it worth the $2,799.95 price tag? Because the 1.4 is only $600 from Nikon, but that's not an S-line lens. The 1.8, which is an S-line lens that came out at the very beginning of the Z mount, is selling currently on sale for $700. The answer is, for most people, no. For me, for photojournalists, for the White House photographer that now shoots Nikon, the answer to that is this is a must-have lens for full-on professionals. You do environmental portraits, you get paid. This is a baller lens. We got to do a sniff test. We got to do a wind tunnel test. We got to wrap it up after that and tell you who it's for. But let's sniff it and see what we think. Oh, Bastia smell. That's right, it smells like the kitchen at Bastia, which is good. Make a reservation for there. If you do come to Philly, go to Bastia and tell them the Fro sent you. It might get you a free glass of water or something, but you can tell them I sent you. Wind tunnel test. Let's huff and puff and blow this mother down. That's a complete fail. It's a failure of a wind tunnel test. It's such a failure because it's such an amazing lens, I'll just tell you that. So Nikon did something that Canon and Sony has not done at this point. Now, should Nikon have focused on making a 28-70 f2, which Canon and Sony both have, which is probably a more versatile lens, and it's why I switched from Sony over to Canon, was because of that 28-70, but you don't have that option with Nikon. I think if they made that, they would have sold more than they're gonna sell of this, but this is an absolute gorgeous lens for photojournalists, for wedding photographers, for people that want to show the environment and want the best of the best with honor, sir. For everybody else, you kind of don't need to spend the money on this. You could spend $600 for a 1.4 and you're probably not going to know much of a difference. Now, for Nikon shooters deciding between what 1.2s to go with, in my opinion, a 35 1.2 and an 85 1.2 is a better choice than a 35 and a 50. You don't need a 50 and an 85. That's what I would walk around with. That's where I'm going to leave it, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so just yet. Hit the thumbs up, give us a like, give us a comment down below, and thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, PhotoPhoto.com. See ya.